Good morning. Welcome back. This is Neil McQuana and Michael Parekh here. We're back with a post-Apple WWDC 2025 show yesterday. If you haven't watched it, the full description links are in a Substack post on AI Reset to Zero. Everything they announced, everything they didn't announce, all the complaints, all the hurrahs. Please go check that out. But today, since Neil and I did a pre-WWDC show a couple of days ago on this video podcast, we thought we'd do a post to go through our reactions, other people's reactions, our reactions to their reactions, and most importantly, what mainstream folks like your mom, my sister, Neil, are going to think about all this stuff. When all these new glass, liquid glass, whatever they call it, you'll explain it, things that show up magically on her iPhone, her Mac, or watch, all this stuff. What is going to be the mainstream reaction to all this stuff? Because we geeks, we can talk about this till the end of time. By the way, yesterday was Christmas for us Apple fans. September is going to be the second Christmas where, there'll be new actual devices. They didn't announce any new devices or, typically the new iPhones are in September, etc. This year, hopefully as well. We'll see what happens with tariffs and prices and all of that. That's a separate issue. Also discussed on the Substack in detail, AI Reset to Zero. But I think today, let's talk about these post reactions. Neil, why don't you kick us off with your thoughts, what you took away from 90 minutes of Apple joy in Cupertino?
Yes. So there's a lot to cover. We'll start off with, I think the thing everyone's focused on. Mark Gurman had obviously reported on it for Bloomberg. We covered it in the pre-show that Apple was going to be doing a complete redesign to align a bit more with what they've done with Vision OS last year. And it comes in the form of liquid glass, obviously named in a very Apple way. It's essentially a complete UI overhaul. They've created this new material, as Apple likes to call it, called liquid glass, which shows up everywhere from app icons to menus to buttons. And it's a complete overhaul. A lot of people online that I've seen and any reaction are obviously drawing comparisons to Windows Vista and Aero Glass.
But that was over 10, 11 years ago.
Yes.
Right, Neil?
And exactly. So it is kind of a return to that, but done a lot better, and obviously in a very Apple way. I think they did a really good job of walking through their thought process behind it. And now I've seen people using it in developer betas this past morning on Twitter and stuff, and seems to be fairly positive reaction. Some people are a bit concerned about things like the readability of it, but obviously this is a beta, so everything will be ironed out in the coming weeks. The main, I guess, poster image that a lot of people have been using is this clear mode that Apple's announced. So obviously last year they added a lot of home screen customizing options where you could change the color and tint of your icons as well as how they're placed. And to follow on that, this year they've added this clear mode, which seems very Apple. I mean, I haven't seen this done stock on any Android platform, or at least done in a good way. And this seems very intentional. They have put a lot of work into it, seemingly. So, what are your thoughts on Clear?
Within 30 seconds of seeing the Clear version, it brought back what Steve Jobs told Johnny Ive back in 1997, 98, when they were designing the translucent iMac, which was an iconic Apple product. Google that if you don't know. It's beautiful even today. And Steve Jobs said just one thing to Johnny Ive, who just now is part of OpenAI through a 6 billion plus transaction. He said to Johnny, make it lickable. And to me, the liquid glass was lickable. It was beautiful. Not just the icons and the shapes and the fact that you can adjust the tints and do it across all the platforms, right? Because majority, about half the smartphone users in America are in the Apple ecosystem, including mainstream folks like Neil's mom and my mother-in-law. So it goes across all these things. The liquid glass, however, is not just superficial. To me, what also hit me is the simplicity that they also are conveying to the developers, millions of developers who are tracking all of WWDC all this week. By the way, WWDC is not just the keynote. Watch the keynote, but it's actually thousands and millions of developers interacting with Apple engineers over the next week, this week, I should say, into the details of it. And so the core thing about liquid glass that I took away was that they're simplifying the user interface on almost every app, whether it's in the at the operating system layer or the application layer. There are fewer buttons, fewer icons. It's simpler for regular folks to figure out what this does, what how to use the camera, how to use notes, how to use this app, that app, and anything else complexity you want, you just press and hold, and then this other lickable interface shows up with more buttons and explanations and so on. And so I think it's very, very cool. And obviously every platform company, Google with Pixel has, they've got their material expressive version this year, which is the opposite direction, very skeuomorphic. Neil, you talked about it on the pre-show. That's when these things look like physical objects in the real world. Apple's going this other way. There was one wag on Twitter who said, "Hey, this is kind of like the Terminator movie with the T-1000, the liquid robot that would show up." And yeah, there's a lot of inspirations from everything, whether it's Windows or the Terminator movies, but Apple's just trying to, think different, as it were, pun intended, and do something cool. So I give them a 9 on a 1 out of 10 in terms of anticipation on the liquid glass. That move was towards simplicity. So that was one of my big positive takeaways. And I'm not always an Apple fanboy, positive. If it's negative, I'll say that. But I like this one versus all the general reactions that, oh, it's not enough. And then I'll just continue, if I may. The other big thing that everyone was looking for is Apple saying something about AI. And they, in the first a minute or two, Craig Federighi, who heads up all software at Apple, said it out loud. He said, "Look, Apple Intelligence, you're going to see it in a lot of things. That's their version of AI. And Siri and other things, which are the voice-enabled, machine learning-driven things, that is delayed. That's been a big controversy. So a big thing that if you are reading about Apple post WWDC, over half the reactions are going to be they're behind on AI. Where is the AI? Where's the beef in terms of AI? They're behind ChatGPT. They're behind all these other things. My takeaway is the opposite. I've written about it. I've been on shows, video. You can look it up. I think Apple's just getting started. They are not behind. The rest of the world is also just inventing and reinventing AI beyond the chat GPT or the chatbot model. AI is going to be in everything. And if you actually look closely at what Apple did over 90 minutes yesterday, there was AI everywhere. It was just in minute form. The second big gut punch for me from the keynote was that they announced a framework for developers on AI. They're putting local models. These are smaller, not fancy, big, chunky, billions, trillions of parameter models. They're 2, 3 billion parameter models that sit on the device itself, which means that they can do very interesting things by the application with your data personally. Everything is on the device, so it's super private. Nothing goes to the cloud. It's super fast. And developers can now take those models, and Apple will add more of them, more memory, more this, that, as they have upgraded iPhones, upgraded iPads, computers, etc. And developers will be able to really do useful things with AI going forward. And by the way, Apple's not behind on this. Everyone is doing the same thing. Everyone is trying to build the devices of the future. That's what the OpenAI AI merger for $6.5 billion was about. What do they say? We'll have a family of products over the next 2 or 3 years, maybe as early as next year. We hope to sell 100 million of them. Well, Apple already has almost 2.5 billion devices that are being used every day. And so they're saying, we're going to give you some of that stuff today. And in terms of some of these applications, you just stay tuned. The more is coming. So those were my two takeaways. I love the interface, liquid glass, and I love the simplicity thing. And I love the fact that AI is there, just not in the way that we normally recognize it today. But it will be very obvious when we start to use this, from the baby steps that they're taking today to the kinds of robust things we'll be able to do tomorrow.
No, exactly. I couldn't have said it better. And in lieu of all the redesigns, they did have another interesting redesign that we had mentioned, and I wanted to walk through before we go through some of the other platform changes they've done. But they've essentially remade the camera app. Let me find it right here. Yeah, so it's this little animation that they have, which this was also reported on, and we discussed in the pre-show that Apple would be kind of dialing back some of the complexity of the camera app. obviously Apple has information on where people are tapping on their screens and what's being used the most, and it's obvious that video and photo were the two most used modes. So because of that, they've removed all the other clutter. The other features are still there. So your panoramic camera, your slow mo, your portrait, all that is still there, but it's hidden away until you kind of swipe to prompt it up. Same with a lot of the other more specific controls like your FPS, which is your frames per second, or the quality of the video in terms of how fast the shutter speed is, and some other things like aperture and whatnot. You know, a lot of camera specific geeky things.
I love this. I just want to jump in if I may. This was one of the joyful moments when they did this because forever that I've been using iPhone since 2007, I can't tell you, at least a third of the time, I'm taking pictures of typically you, Neil, as you're growing up from, this to today. It's just been frustrating. Over a third of the time, I hit take a picture and it's in portrait mode. It's in panorama mode. It just goes across the gamut. I love it. They made it just photo, video, less is more, tyranny of choice, take it away. Yes, for the geeks, for the MKB HDs, for super proficient product guys like you, it's all there. It's all there under a couple of menus. Go find it, play with it, do all kinds of things. But this is the simplicity thing. And this is a huge feature, huge feature. You go to Android, it's just clutter because every year technology gets better. People add more stuff. Designers love to add stuff. Taking away is one of the toughest choices. And I just love this. I just want to highlight this because they're doing it in other apps as well. But this was the one which is so visible and so here
Exactly.
whenever it's available.
And I mean, you know, you kind of touched on it a bit, but I mean, for the normal everyday user, you're not going to care about what your FPS is. You're not going to go in and change the aperture. I mean, people just want to take pictures fast. And I think somewhere Apple could improve with Apple Intelligence down the line. I'm sure they're already working on this, but you know, a quick idea I had while I was kind of watching this keynote from a UI UX point of view is potentially have these smart profiles that can be made for a camera app. So, you know, if there's a professional mode that you just turn on and Apple Intelligence is able to identify that, hey, you want to take higher quality pictures. You're not as worried about the storage on your phone. It'll automatically tweak all the settings so that it's done for you before you even know you want it done. I mean, I think
And
that's
remember,
where, sorry, what were you saying?
no, I just want to add because they're also making the AI functionality that's on the phone available to developers through the foundation framework that they talked about yesterday, which is a very important technical piece for developers. That means every third party camera app, and there are a lot of them, by the way, a lot of the real aficionados on photography typically use third party apps. They don't use the Apple camera app. And they're going to have the ability to also do the same thing using glass, using the simplicity to make that stuff even easier with doing the raw photos, etc. So I love your suggestion about the smart profiles and AI, and that means that those third-party people can also leverage the AI. It's not just something that Apple leverages for itself. That's what Google, for the most part, is. Google has yet to create they're starting to with MCP and other things. This is geeky terms where developers can do stuff. But remember, for Google, it's all cloud-based. Other than Pixel phones, which are their phones, Android phones, which is a very small percentage of the market. The majority of phones are from China, etc. So they don't have the ability to give developers functionality across the hardware and software in a unified way. And that's a very key subtle point I want to highlight, augmenting what Neil is saying. It's a very important point. Thank you, Neil.
No, exactly. So it's good to see that they've kind of rethought this from a first principles approach in terms of the design, and it'll be great to see how it is once we get it in hand. Moving on to another update that I think has kind of gone under the radar for people and will, in my opinion, end up being, you know, whenever we look back on this in a year or so, once we've had time to play around with all this, is their update to Spotlight. Spotlight for
Explain
anyone.
what Spotlight is, just so
Exactly, yeah.
because
So
it's
for
been there forever, but most people, regular people, may not know what the heck Spotlight is. They
exactly.
use it
So
all the time.
for anyone who may not know, Spotlight's essentially the search for Mac. So it's the search bar that you can prompt up by pressing, I believe it's Command Space on your keyboard, or there's even an icon in the top corner, I believe.
It's a magnifying glass. If you're looking on your Mac on the top right, it's been there forever.
Exactly. So it's an easy way for you to pull up basically anything that lives on your computer, whether it's a file, an app, anything that's on your Mac. But for a long time, it was hindered because of several things. Apple hadn't really touched it much since they first introduced it, and because of this, there were third parties that had basically taken this interface and innovated on it, and a lot of people had defaulted to that for their search on Mac. And essentially, what Apple did is they've Sherlocked a lot of those, and they've taken all the features that were great about these third-party things and added it into theirs. Things like being able to add a shortcut. I know in a couple episodes ago we were talking about Arc and Dia, these new
AI browsers.
browsers, and how they're adding these shortcuts for people to be able to quickly search and prompt things on the web, almost returning to this terminal like interface. And Apple, it actually surprised me a lot because it didn't seem like something that they would do, but they've added custom shortcuts. So you can type in SM to prompt, sending a message, essentially turning the spotlight from what used to just be a search bar into this almost, I don't want to say
Terminal
ChatGPT
mode.
like interface, but it is almost reminiscent of a lot of these chat interfaces where you can prompt more than just a search. You're able to actually perform actions, and interestingly, they did a really cool demo where they showed they were using, I believe it was some sort of photo editing software, and somebody wanted to quickly find a feature to change the filter on the photo. And where earlier you may have had to, dig around in menus or pull up a YouTube video explaining it, they were just able to go to Spotlight, and Spotlight was able to contextually know the app that was open and what was kind of going on at the moment on the computer. And they were able to say, I want to add this type of filter, and hit enter, and it did it on the app. I think this is kind of where, a lot of people haven't realized that this is kind of where AI from a context point of view on device is going. We kind of discussed it with the whole Johnny Ive thing that they want to make a family of devices that are better able to understand the context of the user and what's going on your screen. But as we also mentioned, there's very few companies that actually have the liberty of controlling the entire stack from software and hardware, and Apple is one of them. And because of that, they're able to really integrate these AI features that most people may not think are AI deep into the actual operating system, and enable actions like this. They didn't go too far into actual AI integration from a ChatGPT or a Gemini or a Perplexity point of view that some may have wanted. I'm sure this will come either in this update or it'll just come in a future update to where this search bar will essentially turn into a way to prompt any type of action, whether it's on device or pulling from a cloud AI.
And we'll put some of these demonstrations that Neil is talking about in the show notes. And a lot of these topics we've also talked about at AI Reset to Zero. If you just use the search button there, you'll find things as well. The one thing I do want to add here to Spotlight, and I love the Spotlight features that you augmented, that they're bringing AI locally into Apple Search, is just that I want to highlight that this is a key example. These are the baby steps I'm talking about, where Apple's taking advantage of its operating system and tech stack, hardware, software, to show you what they can do with not today, it's just a few local models, but tomorrow they're going to be dozens, if not hundreds, and then eventually thousands of language models that'll be both on the devices that Apple has of different forms, different sizes, and in what they call the private cloud, which is their architecture for privacy-enabled use of the cloud to do bigger computation that they can't do on local devices before connecting it to external AI services, which they will partner with. They're doing right now, as Neil, you mentioned, with OpenAI and ChatGPT. They've also hinted strongly that they're working with Google with Gemini. Google pays them $20 billion a year to use their search, and Google's CEO Sundar has said, hey, we also would like Apple to use Gemini. There's court cases around this. I've written about all of this. Again, you can search on AI Reset to Zero for if you want to read more. But the point is that Apple, when people say, hey, Apple, where is AI? Apple is saying, we're going to work with the best AI out there, AIs out there from all of these companies, whether it's Google, whether it's OpenAI, whether it's the companies like Perplexity, and it could be overseas companies. I've talked on other shows that, hey, I wouldn't be surprised if Apple, once the US-China geopolitical stuff hopefully calms down a little bit post the tariffs, etc., that Apple can, in China, offer and partner with AI companies in China like DeepSeek and others. Alibaba has a big model called Qwen, Qewen. And my point is, Apple's ecosystem can work with both their own AIs, other people's AIs, on the device, on the cloud. This is very unique positioning relative to any other what's called Magnificent Seven company. And I just want to highlight for those people disappointed by where's AI. The AI is everywhere, and Apple has a very methodical, proactive approach to this, unlike the current perception that they're being reactive to AI. I disagree with that notion, if that's not clear already.
Exactly. So it'll be very, cool to see how this develops once people are able to get it in their hands. Moving on from this, I don't know if you wanted to add anything else on the AI spotlight piece. I did want to also bring up, a lot of people were talking about there's two ways that Apple could go about this keynote. They could, promise a bunch of AI features and then hopefully deliver on them in future updates, or they can kind of go another route and, provide a lot of wish list features that I'm sure they've been working on internally. And they did kind of go down the second route, and they did something that a lot of people, honestly, I don't think were expecting, and redesigned iPadOS to feel and look kind of more like a Mac, which, in the past they'd kind of tried to differentiate the two. I know they had that, very funny, I guess, talked about what is a computer ad a couple of years ago, where, someone was using an iPad in the ways that Apple thought that it needed to be used. But in the years since, they've, kind of been inching towards this. It's been coming. But now they've really committed to it, it seems like. I mean, I'll pull up a couple of graphics here. I mean, you can actually open up several windows at once. You can rearrange your windows, how they're sized. There's even, this like traffic light menu here where you're able to, close a window, minimize it, expand it. I mean, this is stuff pulled exactly from the existing Mac UI, to even a point at which, they've added a menu bar at the top. I mean, that's the most Mac thing possible. And they've even changed small things like the trackpad. Whenever you're using the mouse, originally it felt kind of like this almost like aim assist blob that would just kind of float around and connect to the nearest thing. But they've actually added a proper a mouse icon to where you can move around. Obviously, we also mentioned that they would be adding a preview app, which they did. A Mac favorite that a lot of people use to just do quick little editing tasks on documents or photos, and they've added that to the iPad. So it really was a very surprising iPad update, I think, and the fact that they've kind of overhauled it from a multitasking point of view, and I think it's something that a lot of people are going to be happy with, and kind of places the iPad in this interesting new spot. I know I had talked about my last in our last episode about how I mostly use my iPad to consume content now. But now, there is a potential avenue where I'm using it to replace some of the stuff I do on my Mac. Because I mean, the thing that MKBHD and a lot of other people have highlighted is that Apple's really packed in a lot of cool tech into these iPads. And they're extremely powerful. And the biggest complaint earlier was that, hey, there's a new iPad Pro. It's at, $1,000 or whatever, and has really good chip inside. But in the end of the day, it's iPadOS, or what used to be iPadOS. But I think now with this new version of iPadOS, people are going to be able to actually use a lot of the hardware in the way that Apple had originally intended.
No, spot on. I mean, Apple, this a few months ago, their latest hardware with the latest Apple Silicon chips was the M4. The iPad got the M4 chip before the laptops did, which would surprise a lot of people. And so that's why a lot of professional reviewers were like, but you're not giving us the same ability to interact with the operating system that we get on the Mac. So there's this, just like the big perennial question on Apple is, where's the AI? The other one is, make the iPad just like the Mac, which I think misses the point. Apple, I'm a gadget geek, Neil, as you know, as you've known me for over the years. I have all not just the Android, but the Windows machines. Microsoft has this whole family of products called Surface laptops and computers. You can today buy an iPad-like device that's both a Windows computer and a tablet, all fused into one. So that's the good news. The bad news, if you try to use it, yes, you can touch the screen and you can use mouse and cursor, etc., but it's a mess. It's a mess. I have Surfaces, I have Samsung tablets over there. It's the UI UX is its mess. What Apple is doing is something very different. They're doing UI UX from the iPad OS side that have similarities increasingly to the Mac side. But I think this goal of we want this to merge, that iPad OS should merge with Mac OS, kind of misses the point. It's like I have nephews and nieces, besides you, Neil, that are non-identical and identical twins. And we all know twins. With twins, we don't want them all to be the same. Twins, the wonderful thing about twins is they're similar, but they're different. And that's the cool part. So why not have a Mac OS and an iPad OS that do different things, similar things? There will be similarities because they're twins, but they're really different types of devices from a usability point of view, carryability point of view, etc. And that is the joy. That is the delight. Yes, at any given time, one device is more for consumption, one is more for production. A laptop, of course, is both all the time. Adding these pieces of functionality the way they're doing it thoughtfully, I still like a lot of things that are very different with iPad OS versus a Mac. And I don't want that to go away. And there's less discussion of that than there should be, either at a technical level or a review point of view. And I just wanted to underline that point that, sometimes two is better than one, and that's okay.
Exactly. Once again, as with all these things, we've only been shown very limited demos so far and kind of some of the in-hand reviews that have happened over the last 24 hours or so. So once the betas, I know the betas for developers shipped this morning. So as people actually get their hands on this, it'll be really cool to see, how true it is to an actual multitasking computer-like interface and what all is possible with the iPad. As far as WWDC, I think that covers the main highlights I had. I wasn't sure if there's anything else you wanted to touch on or yeah, I mean, I think it was a really, really interesting show. We'd kind of talked off camera yesterday about this, how our like initial reactions coming out of it. And it's always fun to do initial reaction stuff because, you see how your views change or if they stay the same. It's kind of what hits you first. You would mention, how you thought it was one of the best events they've had and everything was, it was a coherent message they were trying to say that we're doing AI, but we're doing AI in ways that people may not think are AI, as Apple always has. And I'd mentioned initially that it felt a little sporadic, that they had tried a bunch of different things and kind of put it all together in a keynote to potentially appease the people who were still waiting for the AI. My stance on that hasn't changed as much. I still do think it is kind of all over the place. But the more I have sat and thought about it, that's the thing with these hour and a half keynotes is that they throw a lot of features at you fast, and it's kind of hard to sit and think about what all has been shown to you. And now that I have spent some time thinking about it, seeing some of the hands-on, I really do think it is a pretty significant update, not only from a design point of view, but from a performance point of view. And it'll be great to kind of get this in hands soon and see what it's like.
Well said. I mean, I think, and I've maintained this a long time, two opposite things can be true at the same time. Yes, there was a lot of stuff. It looks disconnected, etc. But if you look under, from my perspective, there was a lot of unifying, stitching together that's going on. I've written about that. You have the all clear interface that goes across everywhere. There's AI everywhere that developers can leverage across all the hardware platforms and software platforms and create common ways to do things across the apps, across platforms. That's a unifying thing. Very complex, very unique for Apple to be able to do. So that's another thing. We're seeing it in terms of what they're doing with iPad OS and Mac OS, as we talked about. But we didn't have a chance to talk about some of the other platforms like the wearables, like the Apple Watch. There's, by the way, on Apple Watch, both Neil and I in the pre-show, we had one feature, what our wish list was. And mine was if they could only make the Apple Watch not show me, ask me for a pin every time just wanted to look at a time. They introduced a feature which may actually do it. I've not had a chance to test it. I'm going to download the beta a little bit later. But they introduced something called Wrist Flick. And the idea is that anything on your phone, on your watch, that is annoying you, like a notification, you can flick your wrist and it'll go away, presumably to go back to the time. So I can't wait to test that out, because next time it asks me for a pin because it can't figure out that it's me. It's not left my wrist for 18 hours that, in a day that I wear the silly thing. I just want to flick the wrist and see the time. So if they can do that, then they met my pet wish and pet peeve going into the show. I don't think your pet wish was enabled yet.
Yeah,
You
I
may
think
want to repeat what it was.
mine was a bit more involved. It was kind of a dream feature that, is a little abstract, but essentially where you can, if
Very
you're,
Gen Z.
yeah,
I love it.
exactly. It is, I guess, a pretty modern take on it, because it has to do with email and how I think email is a bit archaic, and how I usually use text to communicate with people. And even in our interactions, they're mostly over text, but every now and then you'll forward me an email or add me to a chain, and I hate having to reply with an email. I wish I could reply with a text. And it would be kind of cool to be able to link similarly to how you could reply to a text message thread on iMessage. If I could somehow reply to an email thread on iMessage and just kind of keep the conversation in one place. I think it's a separate discussion, and I guess if people are interested to see it, we could always hold a separate episode of this. But where
We can
messaging is
definitely.
going now, I feel like there's so many different messaging apps. Obviously, Apple has added a lot of features in this new update to kind of be a little bit more like WhatsApp, to where you can change the background, you can add polls, something that a lot of people have been asking for in the group chat. You can finally see if someone is typing and who it is. That's a feature that was missing for a while. So they are adding in a lot of really cool things. But yeah, completely separate tangent, but
But
messaging.
recognize that, we don't just have to wait for Apple, because again, they're opening up to developers. That's the whole week this week. So someone hopefully out there is listening, and they can create this, what you just described, taking email and showing it up on the thing. It's this cross-pollination. It's a continuation of the continuity feature that Apple did show additional things where, your phone screen shows up on your Mac. You can respond to messages, phone messages, could pick up calls on your Mac. So all of this, the foundation is here. And this, whether if Apple builds it or third parties build it, that's the exciting thing, because this is a platform. And so I dare say that your most desired feature is probably closer than we think. And a lot of that also can then be leveraged by AI, because remember, everyone is trying to take AI to summarize their messages, summarize their notifications. So if I have notifications in my email summarizing that stuff, and my messages, guess what? That's in a vector database in the background. You're a developer, so you know what I'm talking about, this technical weeds. And you can leverage that resource and then generate messages back into both clients that the other side uses, etc. This is all extraordinarily buildable. It's not science fiction, and it's all within reach, because the unique advantage Apple has because of its multi-platform ecosystem that I just keep going on and on about. But I do so because a lot of people watching are investors, and they think about this, that, hey, Apple is over here. What is it? What are they doing against all these other oranges? These are apples and oranges in terms of OpenAI over here, Google over there, Microsoft over there, Meta over there. They have their own advantages and things, but don't expect each one to do exactly what the other one's doing. They all are marching to their own drum. So I thought Apple did a great job. I think Neil did a great job of summarizing. Thank you for guiding us through this,
Of
Neil.
course.
We'll have a lot of write-ups on this. We'll have show notes. Please look at for that for more detail, links, etc. And as usual, if you have comments, feedbacks on how we could do this stuff the better, this is I think our sixth one,
Yeah.
Neil. So this is so much fun. Thank you for joining us. We wanted to keep this a little short. Again, as usual, please stay tuned and have a wonderful week.
Thanks.